Rooster here with a new episode of Soloing Secrets, and this is Steve Hackett, a legendary guitarist and pioneer of progressive rock. And as I've admitted in other videos on this channel, I'm a huge prog rock fan, or nerd, whatever you want to call me. And there's no question, Steve Hackett is an important and essential pioneer of progressive rock. Very well versed in classical guitar, nylon string stuff, 6 and 12 string acoustic guitar stuff, and then of course his electric guitar work too, which is all phenomenal. And he's been on the scene since around 1968. A former member of the band Genesis, also a former member of the band GTR, and he's been a successful, solo artist since like the early to mid 70s. So there's no question, Steve Hackett is a legend. So much like we've done in other episodes in the Soloing Secrets series, when you're checking out a certain guitarist or band, it's always a great idea to check out their influences, and that will reveal some secrets and kind of insight into their musical, habits and ideas, and their songwriting and stuff like that. And definitely with Steve, there's a lot of different players and musicians. There's the kind of British blues rock players like Clapton and Peter Green, also a big Hendrix fan. But then classical, J.S. Bach and Andre Segovia and people like that. So here's an image with some of Steve Hackett's elusive musical influences. And as far as some of the people that Steve's worked with in his career, like I mentioned during the intro, he's a former member of Genesis. He appears on 6 Genesis studio albums, and then there's like 3 live albums, I think, and some compilations. And also a former member of the band GTR alongside Steve Howe. They only released 1 album together, but that was a dynamite kind of 80s, matchup with Steve Hackett and Steve Howe. And then he's been a solo artist. He's worked and recorded with a whole bunch of different people over the years. And it's really interesting that like after the year 2000, Steve really picked up like the session and studio work, and he appears on dozens of different albums. But here's some of the people he's played with in his career. And then as far as some of Steve's actual soloing secrets, the things he typically likes to do when he picks up a guitar and plays a lick or a solo, and there's a lot here. He has jazz influences, he's a big Miles Davis fan. Classical influences, like I mentioned Bach and Segovia earlier, and there's just a lot going on, and very expressive and emotive, very melodic, the string bending ideas and everything. He's got these really dreamy, kind of almost eerie sounding bends at times, and actually he's a pioneer of tapping too, arpeggios, all sorts of stuff. But here's an image, showing some of Steve Hackett's soloing secrets. And like I just mentioned, Steve's definitely a pioneer of tapping, and this is way before Van Halen. He was actually tapping with Genesis in the early 70s, and then he continued to do it as a solo artist, in the mid 70s. And he's continued to do it his whole career. He was tapping with GTR in the 80s and stuff. So it's really interesting to notice like what Steve has done on nylon string guitar, acoustic guitars, and also electric guitar too. It's mind-blowing. The music and ideas in this episode came from 4 Steve Hackett-related albums. There's 2 Genesis albums, also his first solo album, Voyage of the Acolyte, and also an example from GTR as well. So here we go. Okay, I'm going to break down what I played during the opening jam a little later in this episode, but the first half of this lesson is going to be all regularly picked, with a pick, and then the second half is all tapped. So if you're a tapping fan like me, get ready, because later in this episode it's going to be like Tapping City. But this first example, this actually came from Ace of Wands, and this is from Steve's first solo album, Voyage of the Acolyte. And it's this slip and slide kind of melodic phrase. It honestly reminds me of Steve Howe a little bit, but it's like this. One more time. And you hear this multiple times in the song, and it's basically revolving around C major. And we're sliding this G to E, and then you're going to pick up that C note right there, like that. And then grab that E, slide down to C, and then grab this A note right there. And you're going to slide the C down to A, grab this F, and slide that up to G. Like that, so really slow. Pretty simple, but I like that slip and slide kind of slippery sound. Something like that. All right, next up is an example from Hands of the Priestess Part 1, which is also from his first solo album, Voyage of the Acolyte. And this is some of that eerie bending I was talking about during the intro. And he's basically doing volume swells and creating this really eerie and kind of mysterious sounding melody like this. That's really, really cool. So he's basically starting on this E flat. I guess you could also think of it as a D sharp. And he's bending that up a half step to E. And he's also doing a volume swell there, like that. So I'm basically picking that note right before I open up my volume control. Like that. And then you're going to basically grab this B and do a similar thing, but you want to do a pre-bend, a half step to C. That B up to C, like that. And you're hearing the release of that bend, C back down to B. And then you're going to grab this A and you want to bend that up a whole step to B. Like that. So it's really interesting. You can do that melody twice, and then the second melody, you're actually going to start on this B flat, like that. And then you're going to do a release bend, you know, a half step from that F sharp. You're bending up to G and then releasing it to F sharp. Like that. And then that E is going to be bent a whole step up to F sharp. So that second melody, like that. I just screwed it up. Like that. Do it again. You're going to release that bend back to E, grab the C note, and then he's grabbing this D sharp. He kind of bends it up to E, and then he ends on this B, like that. Next up's a melodic section from Steve's timeless solo from Firth of Fifth, and this came from the Genesis album Selling England by the Pound, which is on the wall right there. And Steve actually wrapped a North American tour this year. He was touring the US in October and November, and during that time I saw dozens of people post this solo, you know, recorded from their phone. But definitely it's a classic, and this melodic section actually appears 3 times during the solo, and it's this part. Time right there. So just very expressive and melodic, and there's just something about that solo. I don't know what it is. The tone and the phrasing, and it has that eerie, dreary kind of sound. Really cool. So this F sharp's being bent to G, and then you want to release it. You're going to bend this B up to C, a half step, and then this F sharp up a half step to G, and you want to release that bend, and then you're going to start doing this pedal point lick. Start on this B, and then you're going to do that B again, and the pedal point note is the C, so it's B to C, A to C, G to C, F sharp to C, like this. Right, like that. And he's got this really tasty, kind of an implied E minor major 7 idea. You know, so cool right there. That E to G, slide that to B, grab that E right there, and then end on that D sharp. And then it ends with this little, and of course it keeps going, but that melody is repeated, you know, like I said, 3 times in that solo. legendary guitar solo. Okay, now we've reached the middle of this lesson, so we're going to start tapping like crazy. And the intro, basically that was the return of the giant Hogweed, which is from the Genesis album Nursery Crime. And I'm pretty sure that's the first, recorded instance of Steve tapping. And there were definitely players playing, tapped ideas before Steve, but they were mainly like jazz and kind of, classical guitarists, flamenco and stuff. I think Steve Hackett might be one of the first rock guitarists, kind of recorded, tapping like this. And there's basically two parts. There's Steve's tapped, guitar part and also an organ. So during the opening jam, I was actually looping Steve's tapped part and I was playing the organ part, the higher, octave or part. So Steve's technically, like the tapping part Steve played right here. Something like that. So it starts with C minor and he's alternating between this G and A flat as far as, there's two tap notes. And I'm literally just using my index and middle and just kind of going back and forth. I mean, you could do that with one finger if you wanted to and just move that finger back and forth. I kind of like using the two finger approach for some reason there. But it's C and E flat and then you're alternating between G and A flat as far as the tap notes. Like that. And then move your fret hand down a fret and do it again. And then move your fret hand down another fret. It reminds me of Van Halen, Eruption, big time, but on the low E string. Do it again right there. And then right there you're going to move down another fret, but only, tap the 15th fret, that G note. And then right there you're going to move that A to an A flat. And that's really crafty right there. And after that, you're just going to start tapping this G octave. Like that. So really slow. Actual Steve Hackett's, tapping part right there. And you can actually find a video on YouTube of Genesis playing this. I think it's live. I'm honestly not sure what year. I think it was 72, I think. And at the very beginning of that clip, you can see Steve tapping, right, just like that. And of course, then the camera pans and goes to like the drummer, like Phil Collins or somebody. But and then you never see Steve tapping again. But right at the very beginning, you can see it. So there's Steve's part. Right? Now the organ part, this is stretchy and it's much harder to play, but this is the organ part. Right, just kind of a harmony of what we were doing. So that's, E flat and G, and you're tapping this B flat and C right there. Right, move that D flat down to D, and now you're tapping this this B and C. And you're going to move this back to where you've got D flat and this F, and you're going back to B flat and C. And then right there you're going to tap this G and you've got this A and C note. And move that A to A flat and keep everything else the same. And then just start tapping this G octave just like we did with the guitar part. So that's the organ or keyboard part right there. And then you put all that together and you got this. Really interesting interesting guitar part. I love that. Next up's a tapping lick that appears in Hackett To Bits, and this came from the GTR album in the mid-80s, and that's an overlooked, guitar album for sure. I mean, you got Steve Hackett and Steve Howe on the same record. You gotta check that out. And this is really cool, like this. Basically using the open string once again and tapping, and he's tapping this E note to the open G, and then you're going to basically hammer on that C to D. Then you're going to tap that E note again and then pull off D to C to the open G. So you're kind of doing this mirror image thing like this. That's kind of the pattern. So it's up the first time and descending the second time. Then you're going to start changing this note, so it's E to F sharp to G, like that. You're creating that little melody. It's kind of cool, like using that open G. And then right there, he's tapping B flat and then grabbing this F sharp and G with the open B, which is really interesting. And then you hear this B flat bent to B. There's actually like a pinch harmonic right there, and I don't have my pick handy because I'm tapping, so I don't know if it's overdubbed or what, but there's a big squeal in that last note right there, like this. Last but not least is a tapping section from the song Shadow of the Hierophant. This came from Steve's first solo album, Voyage of the Acolyte, once again. And this is really cool. It's also really hard to play, but something like this. Something like that. It's really busy, it's very active, a big challenge too, and it actually starts with this total Van Halen type tapping right here. And this B, D, and you're tapping F sharp right there. And then continue doing that, but then open up the G string. So you're doing... So you're turning that triplet idea into 16th notes, 4 notes instead of 3. Change that F sharp to an E, tap note. And move this D down to a D flat and keep everything the same. And go back to that F sharp and keep everything the same. And go back to that E. And then start tapping that D down there and keep everything else the same. And back to E. And then right there, it basically just starts the same thing again, right here. In the open string. He basically retards it, and then that actually begins the beginning of his guitar solo right there at the end of the tapping, on that B note right there. It actually officially starts the guitar solo. But check that song out. It's actually really interesting. That tapping figure is really cool. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Soloing Secrets with this look at Steve Hackett. Definitely a legendary guitarist, and he's still active. I mean, he just wrapped a US tour and was totally kicking ass. The footage I saw, he sounded great. He sounded better than ever. And there's just something about him. He's kind of the thinking man's guitarist, right alongside players like Robert Fripp and Steve Howe. I mean, definitely Steve Hackett is not for, lazy players or slouch guitarists. It's like you really have to be on top of what you're doing when you try to play his music. whether it's electric guitar, acoustic guitar, nylon string, or whatever. I mean, he's just a musical badass for sure. And there's something about those early Genesis albums, and I'm actually really digging his early like solo output, because that first album he put out, Voyage of the Acolyte, that is super progressive, super proggy. The first time I put that on, I thought, man, where have you been? Because I didn't actually know that album until I started putting this episode together. Definitely brilliant stuff all the way around. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.